In the desolate Wyoming wilderness, one man thought he'd escaped the world forever, until three strangers, three women, appeared at his doorstep with secrets that could unravel his solitude or destroy him entirely. Buckle up, for he lived in isolation, until three women showed up at his ranch, a gripping tale of mystery, betrayal, and redemption that'll keep you guessing until the final twist. Hit that subscribe button now to dive into this unforgettable story and join thousands across the USA and UK hooked on epic narratives like this one. The wind howled across the Wyoming plains, rattling the shutters of Amos Carver's weathered ranch house. For 15 years, Amos had lived alone, a recluse by choice, his only companions the cattle and the endless sky. At 52, his face was etched with lines of hard living, scars from a past he'd buried deep. The nearest town, Coldwater, was 30 miles away, and Amos liked it that way. No neighbors, no questions, no past creeping up. But on a frigid October evening, as the sun bled red into the horizon, three figures emerged from the dusk, their silhouettes stark against the fading light. Three women, strangers, stood at his gate, and Amos's carefully guarded world began to crack. He watched them from the porch, his hand resting on the rifle propped against the wall. The tallest, a woman with sharp cheekbones and a leather jacket, stepped forward. "Mr. Carver, we need your help," she said, her voice steady but urgent. Her name was Lena, and her eyes held a fire that made Amos uneasy. Beside her stood Claire, younger, with nervous hands and a scarf wrapped tight against the cold. The third, Mara, was older, her silver hair braided, her gaze unreadable. They were strangers, yet something about them felt like a memory Amos couldn't place. Against his better judgment, he let them in. Lena explained. Their car had broken down miles back, and a storm was coming. They needed shelter, just for the night. Amos grunted, suspicious but bound by the unwritten code of the plains, hospitality, even to strangers. He gave them blankets and coffee, watching as they sat by the fire. Claire fidgeted, her eyes darting to the door. Mara sat still, too still, her fingers tracing the edge of a locket. Lena did the talking, her story smooth. They were friends on a road trip, heading to Montana. But Amos, who'd spent years reading men's lies in bars and bunkhouses, knew she was holding back. The women didn't act like friends. They barely looked at each other. As the night deepened, the storm hit, wind screaming like a living thing. Amos offered them the spare room, but sleep eluded him. At midnight, he heard footsteps. Creeping to the hallway, he saw Claire rifling through his desk, her hands shaking as she pulled out an old photograph. It was a picture of Amos, younger, standing with a woman whose face was torn from the frame. Claire gasped when she saw him, dropping the photo. "I'm sorry," she stammered. I thought I recognized her." Amos's heart thudded. No one knew about Eliza, his wife, dead 15 years. Or so he thought. The next morning, Amos demanded answers. Lena took charge, her story shifting. They weren't just passing through, they were looking for someone. A man named Daniel Reed, a name Amos hadn't heard in decades. Daniel was his brother, a drifter who'd vanished after a falling out over their father's land. Amos had inherited the ranch, Daniel got nothing. Lena claimed Daniel was linked to a crime in Denver, something about stolen money, and they needed Amos's help to find him. But Claire's eyes told a different story, fear, not purpose. Mara, silent until now, spoke. "Daniel's dead. We're here for what he left behind." Amos's blood ran cold. Daniel, dead, and what had he left? The women knew. Too much, about the ranch, about Eliza, about the safe hidden behind the fireplace. Amos had built it years ago, after Eliza's death, to hide money he'd earned in ways he wasn't proud of. He'd never touched it, a penance for his sins. But these women, with their half-truths and sharp glances, seemed to know about it. Had Daniel sent them, or was this something else? The storm trapped them together for days. Tensions rose. Claire confessed she'd been Daniel's girlfriend, that he'd spoken of Amos before disappearing. She'd found a letter from Daniel, mentioning the ranch and a legacy. Lena, though, seemed less interested in Daniel than in Amos himself. She asked pointed questions about Eliza, about why Amos had cut himself off from the world. Mara, meanwhile, watched Amos like a hawk, her locket now open, revealing a photo of a young girl who looked eerily like Eliza. Amos's mind raced. Was Mara Eliza's mother? No, Eliza had been an orphan. Or had she? One night, Amos caught Lena at the safe, her fingers working a crowbar. He grabbed her, demanding the truth. Lena fought back, stronger than she looked, but Claire intervened, sobbing. "We're not here to rob you," she cried. "Mara thinks you killed Eliza." The words hit Amos like a fist. Eliza had died in a fire, an accident, or so he'd told himself. But guilt had gnawed at him for years. He'd been drunk that night, arguing with her over Daniel, over money. He hadn't started the fire, but he hadn't saved her either. Mara finally spoke, her voice low and venomous. She wasn't Eliza's mother, she was Daniel's. She'd come to find the truth about her son, who'd died in a Denver alley, clutching a map to this ranch. Mara believed Amos had killed both Eliza and Daniel to keep the ranch and its secrets. The safe, she said, held proof, a deed tying the land to Daniel, not Amos. Lena, it turned out, was a private investigator hired by Mara. Claire was the wildcard, loyal to Daniel's memory but terrified of Mara's wrath. Amos opened the safe, his hands trembling. Inside was the money, but also the deed, and a letter from Eliza. She'd known about Amos's past, his deals with dangerous men. She'd hidden the deed to protect Daniel, hoping to reconcile the brothers. The fire wasn't an accident, it was set by those men, tying up loose ends. Amos hadn't killed her, but his choices had. He handed the deed to Mara, his voice breaking. "Take it. The ranch is yours." But Mara didn't want the land. She wanted justice. She pulled a gun, her eyes blazing. Claire screamed, lunging at Mara, and in the chaos, the weapon fired. Lena fell, blood pooling. Amos tackled Mara, pinning her as Claire wept. The storm broke, and sirens wailed in the distance. Claire had called the sheriff during the fight. Mara was arrested, Lena survived, and Claire vanished into the night, taking the deed. Amos stayed on the ranch, alone again, but the isolation felt different now. The women had torn open his past, forcing him to face the man he'd been. He didn't know if Claire would return, or if the ranch was even his anymore. But as the sun rose over the plains, Amos felt something new, not peace, but possibility.